we talk about wrestling spiritually, we're talking about the struggle of bringing our hearts and minds into alignment with the purpose and the will of God. You know, this struggle, sometimes it feels as Christians like we're not supposed to struggle, but the truth is, struggling is part of the process that God uses to lead us to his key purpose in our lives. Paul talked about this key purpose when he said this in Romans chapter 8. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God and are the called according to his purpose. And then he launches into what the purpose is. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed into the image of his Son. And so when we're talking, and this is so important when we're thinking about wrestling, because remember, God is like a potter and he's shaping us, he's molding us. And it's oftentimes in these moments of great struggle and wrestling that God does his greatest work. This series is meant to help you wrestle in a way that shapes you into the image of Jesus. Now, sometimes we wrestle because we think that evil is in fact prevailing. I know you have felt this way. You don't have to watch the news or read the newspaper to feel this way. You just can see the world around you, and sometimes you kind of bear the heart that David was bearing in Psalm 73. He said this in verse 3. He said, "For I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." You know, David was so frank with God. And when he was looking at the world around him, he was looking at those who were living in rejection of the will of God. And he struggled because he's like, wait a minute, those people, you read the psalm, this is what you discover. He says, those people don't have any trouble. Those people, it doesn't seem like they're ever sick. It seems like their circumstances are always good. And why is it that for the wicked, there seems to be no consequences? I love how David is just really honest about his motivation here. He says, he is essentially saying, what's the point? Like, honestly, God, what's the point for me to do the right thing and struggle where the wicked seem to get away with absolutely everything? Now, David was a man who was willing to search his own motivations. And so while he says this to God, he also says, I was envious of the boastful. So it's not as if David is just saying this to God in total righteous indignation. David's like, wait a minute, I kind of want that. Like, I look at what the wicked get away with and I think, man, I'd like to make a little more money. I'd like to have a little more fun. I'd like to be a little stressed out. And if they can experience that, then why can't I experience that too? The answer for the Christian to that dilemma is this: we don't do that because the new purpose in our life is to please God, right? We put our trust and faith in Jesus Christ. There's a whole new thing that God is doing in our lives. And our purpose now is not self-satisfaction or self-gratification. Our purpose is to please the Lord. In fact, Paul was talking about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He's really dealing with the whole picture of being in the presence of God. And right after he says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, he says these words. He says, therefore, we make it our aim, whether present or absent, to be well-pleasing to him, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. And so Paul, just with kind of the end in mind, realizing that one day he's going to stand before God and working from there backwards, he's like, man, because I know one day I'm going to stand before him. One day I'm going to stand before the bema seat, the judgment seat of Jesus Christ. It's my aim in this life not to please myself, but to please God. You know, David goes through this whole, back to Psalm 73, David goes through this whole process of the litany of reasons why, you know, he seems to think that, you know, the evil are able to prosper in this way where circumstances are good and there's an abundance of wealth and there seems to be no trouble. But he, you know, comes to the right point in verse 15 when he says these words, if I had said I will speak thus, behold, I would have been untrue to the generation of your children. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful for me. Check this out. Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then I understood their end. And so, you know, David goes through this process like David always does, but he gets to the right point. And this is what he acknowledges, man, right thinking about this issue. Like, why is there so much evil? And why does it seem like the wicked get away with everything? He said, man, right thinking is found in the presence of God. Let me just flip that around. He's saying it was my own messed up thinking that began to spin me out, and it happened when I took my eyes off of the Lord. Hey, the truth is this: when you take your eyes off of God, you go into the spin cycle. You don't even know which way is up. Like when you're surfing and you get hit by a big wave, you get pushed down to the seabed, and it's in that place where you're totally disoriented. You don't even know which way is back to the surface. You could be swimming down towards the seabed thinking that that's up when it's in fact down. And when you take your eyes off of God, the same thing happens. You lose sight of the character of God. You lose sight of the big picture. And David knew this. He's like, man, when I'm in that spot, I know I'm going to leave the wrong impression with people around me. It's almost as if David is saying, I don't want anyone to think that following God is a burden, as if we have to suffer along the way, and that's just the way it is in our relationship with God. The truth is that God is more than enough for any of us. David discovered the wrongness of his thinking when he went to the place where the presence of God was dwelling. And what a solid word of encouragement that is. When your thinking is messed up, you need to go to the place where the presence of God dwells and where He speaks to you. And hey, for sure, that is in the assembly of the people of God, but that can happen every single day just in your own intimate time of communion with God. It's in that place of prayer, that place where your Bible is open, that place where you're reoriented and you're seeing things from God's perspective, that you're reminded God always does the right thing, that in the end God will handle it, and that in this life obedience is worth it. Anchor yourself to these truths when it seems like evil is prevailing.